Does pronunciation really matter when you're speaking a different language? Many of you might be scared or a little bit fearful about saying the wrong thing or pronouncing something slightly differently or offensively by accident to a native speaker when you're practicing a different language. And you might feel bad and you might feel reluctant to practice because of that, because you don't want to mess up your pronunciation. The risk of this is that instead of practicing with a native speaker and continuing a conversation, you're more reluctant or you're more fearful about even starting to speak with a native speaker because you're scared of offending them or making a mistake, and you want to wait until you can get your pronunciation perfect before even starting to talk or practice with them. That might be something that you're not completely conscious about, but something in your mind is saying, oh, I'm a bit fearful of speaking with a native speaker. What if they judge me? Your fear can be subconscious a lot of the time. However, in this video, I'm going to give you a few reasons why pronunciation isn't as important as you think it is, and how you can still communicate and speak with a native speaker confidently despite not having perfect pronunciation. So while it's great to aim to have better pronunciation, do not let it stop you from practicing a language just because you're scared of saying it slightly differently or getting a pronunciation a bit wrong. Because overall, the positives of trying to speak a language and making an effort and practicing outweigh the negatives of the chance of you saying something a bit wrong and offending someone. My name's James, I'm a native English speaker. Puedo hablar español e anche posso parlare italiano. I help people reach a conversational level in a different language. So point number one, with context, you're very understandable despite not having perfect pronunciation. For an example, if you're talking about traveling, you could be using the word for plane, like I like to travel on a plane to Spain, for example. However, another word could be shoe. I'm not going to get language specific here, but these are just examples of when in different languages, the sound of two words can be very similar and you can say the wrong word by accident. So if I said this to you, oh yeah, I'm looking forward to going to Mexico or to traveling by plane next year on holiday, and instead I say, I look forward to traveling by shoe next year, and it's a very long flight. With those words surrounding the main word that I'm saying wrong, you can understand, you don't mean shoe, you mean plane. So you could replace that with anything. You could say tree or plane, That's just one example of how you can mispronounce a word but still be understood because the other person knows what you're talking about. And at that point, realistically, if you're both getting on, you're both having a conversation, they will care more about what you want to say and the flow of the conversation than you getting a word wrong. They'll be like, wait a minute, that's not quite right, but oh, he means this, right, okay, continue. They're not likely to correct you as well in that situation. They might do at the end if they're nice. They might say, oh yeah, by the way, it's this word or that word, but they won't want to embarrass you by telling you got something wrong. That's what happens, and you'll probably be like that for other people. If they say something in your native language and it's slightly mispronounced, you probably won't stop them in mid-sentence and say, no, it's not this, it's that. You may do, but most likely you're going to be nice to them and say, look, and just continue the conversation because you're having a conversation about traveling and you want to continue doing that despite them making an error. So that's the point. With enough context, anything is understandable. That can even apply in your native language. If someone mispronounces something or someone says something in a different way because they're from a different region, say in United Kingdom where I'm from Manchester, more or less. If I speak to someone from Liverpool, for example, they'll have a different accent and different words completely, and sometimes they'll have a different word to mean the same thing, and I have to understand what could that word mean. And the more they talk about things around it and they expand upon their point with other words around the context, I get, oh okay, and I learn that word, what it means from the context. And that's also what we do for other languages too. If we have a new word that's the key of a topic and we have other surrounding words, we can guess what that means. So context matters most, and keeping the flow of conversation matters more than getting 100% pronunciation. Point number two, I've already mentioned this a little bit, but even in our native languages, we don't pronounce everything correctly. I'm making an effort right now to improve my pronunciation so that more people on YouTube can understand what I'm saying. However, speaking to friends and family, I slur words. I slur it so much, especially if I've had a drink or something. I do not pronounce anything, and I'm surprised that people who aren't native in English can still understand me because I can speak quite fast and short. Now, that applies to every single language as well. In our native tongue, when we know that our friends can understand us, we put slightly less effort in making it very clear to them. So as long as the context is understood and we understand the surrounding words, that's what matters. Another point on this is if you're studying a different language, say I'm English and I'm studying Spanish, I could learn different words according to the region. So for example, Spanish in Malaga is very different to Andalusia, more southern Spain, and that's very different to Colombia or Venezuela. So every region, every country has a different dialect and different way of saying things in different languages. So I might think that I've learnt Spanish perfectly for Valencia, for example, but then I have been actually to Andalusia and I can hardly understand what they're saying. I can understand maybe 80% at points or what they're saying in Valencia. But then if I go to Andalusia, my Spanish, I basically think, what the hell have I even learned Spanish here? It goes out the window, and I'm like, I do not understand the word because they sometimes miss off the word endings, and it's not a bad thing, it's just different. And the same applies to if you're not a native English speaker and you come and visit London or you visit Manchester or somewhere more northern, maybe Yorkshire, you'll notice that they have a very different way of pronouncing things, and it varies. So if you're trying to reach 100% of your perfection in terms of pronunciation for one region, you're going to also have to do the same with every regions. So where do you stop? If your aim is to get to 100% pronunciation, but then every region or every area has a slightly different way of doing it, which one do you pick? Or do you have to know every single pronunciation? The answer is you don't. You accept that you're not going to get perfect pronunciation for every single region, but what you know so far is fine. So as long as you can stay in a conversation and you say what you feel the word is and you pronounce it as correctly as you can, then the other person will likely be able to guess what you mean based on the context. So that means you don't have to learn every single word, every single dialect from all across the world if it's different dialects of English, for example, or different pronunciations of Spanish words. It doesn't matter. Just as long as you're relatively okay and people can guess the word based on the context around it. Now, the third point, and this is quite a major point, I think, because a lot of people who have come to me have said, I'm scared of saying the wrong thing or offending someone in their language, offending a native speaker by mispronouncing a word to them. So it might be that you say a certain word and actually you mispronounce it slightly, so it's a vulgar word or not a nice word. And they can normally tell if you want to be offensive by your body language and your tone of voice. If you're looking at them as dead in the eye and you sound like you want to cause them harm, then obviously they'll take it a different way. But most likely, for most of the people watching this video, you want to communicate with people to make new connections, make new friends, and use it well, basically. If you know a swear word in a language, you'll use it as banter, as a joke with someone else, if you get on with them, basically. But essentially, the effort that you're putting in to try and learn someone else's language, they'll appreciate that massively. Because it's not every day that someone else can speak your language. And if someone from a different country is coming over to your country and you're trying to make friends and you try and speak their language, they'll be like, wow, your language level is really good, and you'll get compliments from them. Then if you mispronounce a word and you say something that's vulgar or swear word in their language, they might be like a bit shocked, but they'll laugh at it. They'll joke with you, basically. So that's a worst case scenario. So many of you watching this who are scared of mispronouncing a word, in the sense that you might offend someone by saying a vulgar word or a word that's not appropriate, then try and think to yourself, they appreciate you for trying to learn in their language. And if you're showing effort visibly and getting your words out and thinking what to say, and you're smiling and your body language is positive, then that outweighs any negative that they might perceive from the mispronunciation of a word that you've said to them that they might be a bit offended by. So most likely they'll be okay with it. And if they're not, then just don't continue talking to them. If they get offended by the slightest thing, despite you trying to make an effort, then they're probably not someone that you want to be friends with anyway. So, to summarise, many people watching this might be a bit reluctant or scared of speaking with a native speaker, and one of the reasons subconsciously in your mind might be because you don't want to make mistakes, because you don't want to look like an idiot, or you don't want to offend someone by mispronouncing a word and saying something offensive. Hopefully, these points have made sense to you, and essentially, the benefit of maintaining a conversation and continuing the conversation exceeds and outweighs any risk of saying the wrong thing or mispronouncing a word. As long as you've got enough context around what you're saying, that's the main thing, because the other person, a native speaker, can most likely guess what you want to say. And also, given that there's so many different accents and ways of saying things around the world in multiple different languages, you cannot expect yourself to be 100% perfect on the pronunciation of every single word of every single dialect and accent. It's just not going to happen. So the best thing to do is accept that your pronunciation is never going to be always 100% perfect, but just understand that despite it not being perfect, you'll still be understood anyway. And you can still communicate with a wide range of people across the world, and they will understand what you mean with your social interactions, your body language, and the words that you say surrounding the word that you're mispronouncing. Now, finally, YouTube is really good at suggesting videos for you that it thinks that you'll benefit from and that it thinks you'll gain value from and help you get closer to reaching your language learning goals. So you can see here or here, you'll be able to see a recommendation for you. I recommend that you click on it because then you'll get closer to your language goals in less time. That's it for now. See you later.